Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Grae Wilder, an undergraduate researcher studying human-wildlife coexistence in Nepal this summer. And I'm super excited to start this video because I think there's a lot of gatekeeping with certain conservation work in general, but also conservation terminology and biology concepts that I feel like are very either underappreciated or not talked about enough. And as an early career scientist and researcher, I think it's really important to get these words out there. Like, if you are an early career biologist or conservationist, either in high school, undergrad, out of undergrad, grad school, this is just a few words or subjects that I feel like are kind of a little more niche, but also pretty widely used within conservation. I think there's kind of a barrier between you should know all these these words and this terminology versus the reality of well, somebody's got to teach you those words and teach you that terminology for you to really understand it well. So I hope you enjoy this video with just a couple words that I think are really important to acknowledge within the conservation world and learn, because you may be reading these words in articles and in research papers and you might have a very general understanding of it, but I think it's very important to have a deeper understanding of what this word truly means, especially when we're talking about some of those niche words that we're going to be covering today. So without more delay, let's jump right in with rewilding. So I taught a course at UC Berkeley called Conservation in Action, and a lot of the students in my class, when we talked about rewilding, I realized that not a lot of people really understand what this word really means. And it's the practice of actively reintroducing missing species, especially large herbivores or carnivores, to restore ecological processes. So it's kind of the best example that I can give for this word is the California Wolf Project right now is working to reintroduce gray wolves back into California, where they are originally native, but they were overhunted and kind of wiped out from California historically. But now there's an initiative to rewild California and bring these wolves back to their native landscapes. So there is a lot of controversy that comes with rewilding, and so I think it's a really important term for people to understand, especially if you're jumping into the field of conservation for the first time. Rewilding is definitely an up-and-coming word that is very underdefined. I think not a lot of people understand exactly what that means. So yeah, basically that's rewilding. And then the next word I was going to go into, or the next topic, is novel ecosystems. So these are ecosystems that have been heavily altered by humans and now contain new combinations of species that have never coexisted before. So instead of trying to restore them to their original state, like maybe rewilding would be, conservationists sometimes manage these novel ecosystems for resilience and function. So again, what this means is that novel ecosystems have been heavily changed by humans and now are experiencing new species interactions that have never been seen before. So again, when we're talking about novel ecosystems, it's not necessarily a new type of biome or something, but it's in fact more interactions based, where species that have never interacted before are now interacting. And so it's really interesting as a scientist and researcher to kind of view these interactions and learn from them and see how they kind of play out. So that's novel ecosystems. And next, I wanted to go over trophic cascades. So this term describes how changes at the top of the food chain like removing a predator, for example, can ripple down and drastically alter entire ecosystems. So understanding trophic cascades helps people explain why every single species on this web of interactions matters. And this is one word that I feel like is a little bit more common within the words on this list so far, but I think it's important to really deeply understand trophic cascades, because when we're talking about conservation and we're doing conservation education and management, it's really important to describe the web of interactions and the destruction that happens when you take a certain species out of this web of interactions very seriously and very effectively. And so it's important for us, as maybe like whoever is watching this video is probably interested in conservation, whether you're going into it as a career or maybe that's just a hobby of yours or an interest of yours. It's important to be able to communicate this effectively with other people, because when we're talking about the reason that we need conservation in general, or the reason that a certain policy maybe is going to negatively impact the environment, we need to talk about trophic cascades and be able to truly understand that and communicate that effectively. So again, that is trophic cascades. And the next word that I was going to talk about is ecological traps. So these occur when animals are attracted to habitats that look good but are actually harmful. So for an example, birds nesting in areas that have a lot of high predation risk is an example of an ecological trap. Because maybe the area looks perfect for a nest, but they don't realize that this area is, prone to having a very high predator population, and they would be at risk if they were to have their nest here. So identifying ecological traps is crucial for effective conservation planning. And what I mean by that is when we're planning where to reintroduce a species or where to protect certain lands for certain endangered species, for example, it's important to know the predator-prey dynamics in that ecosystem and recognize if it's an ecological trap. So again, that is a super important term to know within conservation. And the next one I was going to talk about is assisted migration. So as climate change shifts habitats dramatically, assisted migration is becoming more involved in moving vulnerable species to new, more suitable locations to help them survive. So this is a bit of a controversial tool, but it's basically when humans step in and assist the migration of some animals to protect them from impacts of climate change, for example, or pollution or habitat loss. All those things contribute to reasons why conservationists or biologists may want to assist the migration of a certain species to a new habitat or a new part of their range. And again, I mentioned it's controversial because any interaction that goes beyond observation is going to have people who believe that we should let nature take its course, or maybe they have a certain problem with moving these animals to a different location because it may impact them and their livelihood. So it's important to recognize those things when we're talking about assisted migration, and recognize different perspectives that contribute to this controversial nature of assisted migration. So that is that term. But another term to know is phylogenetic diversity. So this one I kind of learned a lot about in university, but I think I had no clue what it was before taking certain classes. So phylogenetic diversity is the act of, let's say, instead of just counting species, it measures the evolutionary history represented in a community. So by protecting phylogenetic diversity, it means preserving the tree of life's deepest branches, so to speak. And again, phylogenetic diversity is just the genetic diversity within a population is so important when we talk about conservation, because are we truly conserving the species if it's, if every single individual within that population is like a sister or a brother, like siblings genetically to each other? That's going to be a problem. So it's really important to acknowledge phylogenetic diversity with conservation management practices. And the next word I was going to go into is biocultural diversity. So this concept links biological diversity to cultural diversity, and it recognizes that indigenous peoples and local cultures play a vital role in conserving nature. So again, when I think recently within conservation, there's a huge movement to include indigenous perspectives and make sure that community-based conservation is prioritized, because there's this huge history of people coming in from prestigious opportunities and prestigious backgrounds, coming into a community that is impacted by the things that they've been learning about, and not really understanding the cultural basis and the specific local interactions that happen every single day, where these people actually have to live with the animals that you're conserving, if we're talking about wildlife conservation, and they actually have to deal with the consequences of the work that you're doing. So again, this is a huge not trend, because I feel like it should never go away, but it's a newer practice that is being encouraged within conservation, is to include indigenous perspectives and make sure you're facilitating community-led conservation efforts. And finally, functional redundancy is another term that I wanted to define in this episode. And with functional redundancy, I wanted to talk about the fact that in ecosystems, multiple species often perform similar roles. So functional redundancy means that if one species disappears, the other can fill its role, helping ecosystems stay stable. So it's important to know when we're talking about conservation management, and possibly dealing with underfunded opportunities. I mean, conservation is historically underfunded, and there might not be enough resources to help every single species the way that it's in an ideal world would be, and so it's important to realize when certain species overlap in ecological niches and have that functional redundancy, because it is it fosters competitiveness, but also if the worst comes to worst, the ecosystem will be able to survive and not crash. So it's something to reckon with. And then the last, or actually I have two more terms that I wanted to talk about, but the first one I wanted to talk about is edge effects. So when habitats are fragmented, these edges of the ecosystem of that habitat often experience the most sunlight, or the most wind, the most conflict with human civilization. So it's important to manage edge effects effectively and label them for what they are, which is that effect that may not impact the center of that habitat that's more protected or shielded from outside influences, versus the edge of that habitat where human interactions come into play, where weather kind of impacts those areas more. And as a scientist, again, it's super important to realize that and to combat that if necessary. And finally, the last one of this video is called ecological resilience. So this is the ability of an ecosystem to absorb disturbances and still maintain its functions and structure. So building resilience is a major goal in conservation under climate change, and this word is possibly one of the most important and interesting and fascinating words on this entire list and in this entire video, because maintaining ecological resilience is one of the most pressing issues of our time today, because climate change is happening. It's you know, some impacts are irreversible already. So it's important to acknowledge this and build resilience as much as we can while we still have these ecosystems running effectively. So yeah, without this terminology, I think it would be very hard to describe exactly what conservationists are putting into motion within climate change. And after all that, those are the 10 words that I really wanted to go over today that are kind of buzzwords within conservation, but may not be defined all that often for people who are, you know, just coming into this field, or maybe who need a refresher, or maybe are new to the you know, the more modern aspects of conservation. All these terms are kind of newer and a little niche. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hoped it helped to kind of put these words into perspective for you. And if you like this video, or you know, want to see similar videos in the future, please like, comment, and subscribe. My channel is all about wildlife biodiversity and wildlife conservation and management practices, and also lots of videos on tips and tricks as an undergraduate researcher and getting into college, getting into grad school, all those things in between. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you again soon on this channel. And check out all the videos I have on my channel, and hopefully you guys like a few. So yeah, thank you guys for watching again, and I hope to see you soon. Bye!